Welcome to Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegans Wake, just to hear it out loud. Join Toby Malone and TJ Young, along with some special friends, as we puzzle our way through what we once thought was an unreadable book to produce a surprisingly listenable podcast. Welcome to a bonus episode of Wake, the podcast that knows its lines, hits its mark, and memorizes everything in sight, all as we head towards fulfilling a long-held bucket list item, reading James Joyce's Finnegans Wake out loud just once. I'm your host, Toby Malone, joined once more by the man with the longest memory in the business, TJ Young. Hi, TJ.
Oh, hi, Toby. How's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I wish the sun would come out. Pittsburgh is still gloomy, but we're doing all right.
Yeah, we got a dump of snow here in Toronto, so we're digging ourselves out from under that. But it's I feel as though we're honing in on spring. It's coming.
Yes,
It's
it's close.
So I mentioned memory in that opening paragraph. We're going to talk about memory a bunch today. How is your memory? Like when you were an actor, were you good with lines, bad with lines?
I was very good with lines. I just had to get it in my body. I was never the person who could just sit there and read it. Once I got blocking down, I could say, okay, I'm supposed to say this thing and move here and do the thing. It
Right.
takes the whole routine. But like if I can set it to a song, oh boy, howdy, do I get
Yeah.
it quickly, you know?
Good. Yeah, I got to say, memory was probably the thing that killed my acting career because learning lines was always a point of stress, and I was always that guy who was still calling line in tech rehearsal. I just couldn't. Yeah, it was one of those things, and maybe I've been hit in the head playing rugby too often. I'm not sure what it is, but memory was not my friend. So the reason why we're asking and about learning lines today is because we're very pleased to welcome an extremely special guest to Wake, a man whose feats of memorizations are so astounding that we're going to need to come to grips with the sheer possibility of it all. Neal Kosaly-Meyer, welcome to Wake.
So great to be here.
So, yeah, I mean, I apologize for just reducing most of my introductory statements to memory because it's obviously more than memory, but you are notorious or well-known or famous, however it is, as being the man who, in 2014, started memorizing and performing Finnegans Wake a chapter at a time, and so you've appeared on lots of different podcasts and things like that. I've seen you speak a lot on this, but what a project! What an amazing project! You tell us a little bit about how this all got started?
It got started a long time ago. And John Cage is a composer that I revere, and who was, when he got excited about somebody or something, he would evangelize ceaselessly for it. And in the late 70s, he got excited about Finnegans Wake, created a beautiful composition, oratorio, based on the Wake, and which I enjoyed very much. And just hearing him talk about it persuaded me that, okay, I need to actually, come to grips with Finnegans Wake. So I picked up a copy, University Bookstore in Seattle. This would have been 1984. And crack it open and look at the first page. And the first thing that stops me dead in my tracks, like I think it probably does a lot of people, is wait, there's 100-letter word like in the middle of this page. What am I even supposed to do with that? Well, the thought immediately came to me because I'm a musician, and so the thought question, what do I do with this, was followed by, oh, it's like one of these difficult Beethoven pieces that I work on and practice. And this is not something to be that you sit down and you read and you just go through it. If you want to get what that word is about, you have to take it into little bits. So,
Yeah.
baba da, baba da, just little bits at a time. Baba da, garang. Okay, baba da, garang. I got that. Talk 'em and run. gone, run, done, run. Okay, that's a little bit bigger bite. I should tuck him in a run, run, run. So I worked at it like that, and I
Hmm.
learned it. And then I thought, okay, this word is also interesting because where do the stresses go? You're reading even the weird stuff in Finnegans Wake, you feel like you got a sense of there's going to be an accent on the beginning or something that's going to go like this. And this thunder word, you have to just as you're learning to say these things, it says, okay, where does it rise? Where does it
Hmm.
fall? How does it go? Um, so I worked on it and I worked on it, and finally, okay, here we go. Baba Badaga Rock, Takamin Run, Kamperan, Tanaran to one Thuntrovaran, Ordinance. And I was so pleased with myself.
Of
Uh,
course.
and the other great work of literature that then comes to mind is once I had done that is the classic "If you give a mouse a cookie,"
Hmm.
because I learned that and I said, well, if I learned that, maybe I should just learn the paragraph
Mm.
Right.
goes around it, which I learned that. And then by this time, I picked up Joseph Campbell's Skeleton Key to Finnegans Wake, and he's
Mhm.
talking about the significance of those first four paragraphs. I says, oh, well, I learned this. I learned the thunderclap. I learned the paragraph around it, but here's these first four paragraphs are all seem to be like a unit. So I'll learn
Hmm.
that one. And then by the time I learn that, then I think, well, maybe I'll just try and learn the chapter. And it was off to the races. Um,
And so at
it,
what point did it become a performance piece? So when you've learning it is one thing, but when did
yeah,
you start saying it to people?
I took it. It took a while. I think it was probably. It took a long time to put the whole thing together.
Hmm.
I learned that first chapter, and then once I had it, I figured, okay, we should perform this. So we were in San Diego at that point. My wife was doing grad school down there, um, and we said, let's just invite some people over and do this and have some food and have it kind of wakey. We had a big black upright piano that we figured out, oh, if we drape this, just put like a purple bed sheet around the bottom of it, it kind of looks like a coffin. And
Right.
so we did that and did something which I still do to this day is we put microphones inside the piano, block the pedal, and at certain moments, like the thunderclap, especially, and there are two of those in chapter one. I mean, I would bellow those into the piano, and then it would just resonate through
Mm.
our stereo speakers. Um, but it's also it's like it seriously looked like a coffin in the middle of the room. Um, and that was a lot of fun, and people really enjoyed hearing it. And we did probably 10 performances or something like that, just inviting people over to check it out. It was a lot. Um, And after that, I was already starting to, and I actually began to work on the second chapter. Um, but this, and but the idea of learning the whole book felt pretty daunting.
Hmm.
And also, we had our first child uh, mid 1990, so that kind of takes up a lot of energy there. So it kind of went onto the onto the back burner for a good long time. And deciding to actually take the whole thing on, that would have been in 2012, 2013. And it was John Cage again, because that was kind of the occasion for that, because 2012 was Cage's centenary.
Mm.
And I organized a number of performances here in Seattle for that occasion. Um, and a few of them involved Finnegans Wake. So there were several cage projects involving Finnegans Wake that I zeroed in on and performed at that time. And so after the last performance in would have been in January 2013, I included Cage's second writing through Finnegans Wake, which is like a intensely abridged version of the book. I mean, where you basically go through the whole book, but the words are selected by a chance procedure involving James Joyce's name. So you end up kind of getting through the whole book in 45 minutes, which is convenient. It's one way to go at it. It's a pretty delightful text on its own. But once I had done that, and then there had been another of the Cage projects where I learned all 10 thunderclaps.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a piece that involved just those thunderclaps. So I figured, well, I know the thunderclaps, and this was kind of fun to do this kind of pass through the whole book. What about if I go back and learn the whole damn thing? And kind of thinking that, and the other thing is because it's always been in the back of my mind, but by now I'm like 54, 55 years old, and I'm thinking this is going to take a good long time to do. And if I actually want to do it, I probably shouldn't wait around that much longer. So this is like January 31st, February 1st, and I map it out, and I'm kind of looking at a reasonable thing that I know I can learn this much, and it was something like this many. I can get this many pages in a week. I'm going to need to fit some breaks into it, so I don't just burn out. And calculated it all out across the whole book. And when I figured it out, it says, okay, it's going to take me 17 years to learn it. Right. And the significance of that.
Right.
Because exactly how long it took Joyce to write the thing.
Amazing.
So that was like goosebumps, hair on the back of the neck goes, okay, this feels like the sign. And then the thing that I didn't think about, I went to work at it the next day. And I had been working at it for a little bit. It says, wait a second. I figured out that it's going to take 17 years to do this. And I set to work on it on February 2nd, on Joyce's birthday. And then so,
spooky.
And I felt like, that's and part of the planning of it was like, if I'm going to start working on this thing, I'm going to learn chapter 1 again. But I'm not going to try and learn it to perform at the end of 2013. I really want to polish it and get it to a really good place. And so that's why the first performance was end of 2014.
Right.
Which I was thinking in terms of, I thought of Ulysses as being set near the summer solstice.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have the book about the day is set, on the longest day of the year. And so I figured, well, I'll let Finnegan, feels like Finnegan Wake, sense to do Finnegans Wake, like toward the winter solstice. But I knew I didn't want to do it on the winter solstice because, trying to do something right before Christmas, I mean, that doesn't make a lot of sense if you actually want people to come out. So I generally, I did it, like mid-December, so 14th, 15th or something like that. And then I've stuck to that since then. So it's every mid-December, that trot out the new chapter. And this was 2024 was the first time I actually have missed a year, and that's with good reason because the chapter I'm working on now is part two, chapter three, which is a monster.
A monster.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
I mean it's like gonna take like 4.5 to 5 hours to
Oh,
perform. It's like
and you don't break them up. Like for the long
I
ones
don't
like
want
that,
to.
you don't want to
No,
break them. No.
it's like one of the main things that I've learned in the course of this project is there is a wholeness and a flow and a symphonic vibe to each of these chapters that that I'm one of the things I like to do with this is give people the experience of getting the chapter, getting the whole
Hmm.
thing, feeling the way it builds and culminates and the beats throughout that you get there. And so this is the compromise that's happening um, with this chapter is that I figure, okay, this is going to be impossible for me and for the audience for me to do the thing front to back in one go. I mean, we're just going to I'm just going to wear myself and everybody else out, and there's
Yeah.
not much to that. So I figure this chapter there need to be intermissions,
Hmm.
and I think with something that big, I mean, it's like a good demo size production, right?
Yeah.
That I want three intermissions.
Right.
And so this is probably about 2 years ago. I'm looking ahead to this. I say, okay, where do I put the intermissions? And so I get out my get out my book and find part two, chapter three, and I go flip, 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 flip. Right, and here, da, 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 da. And we're about 10 pages in. So I figure that's probably going to be about 40, 45 minutes. That would be a good spot. Is there something here? And right here in the middle, it's 247. This is the restored text.
Right.
So with what I go with, uh, and there, right in the middle of the words, I mean, there's the paragraph. It'll lock to it. Blasphemed the now raging scamp-tail inflating furies, outstrews his camel skins, the flashlight of his eye wackering from the eye winker on his masttop, and a far he fared from Afric arena, and in near united blawland bearing bacon be the brazen sun buttered be the snows, and the sea shoaled the saw squalled, and soaking scupper didn't he drain. Next paragraph, one line, two words. A pause.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that.
It just
Look at
builds
that.
it in for you.
Oh, it says, no way. And so I figure, okay, I'm going to go flip, 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 flip a little bit further and see, is he going to give me anything else like that's that perfect for it? And so here I get to 258, which is going to be like about another 45 minutes in or something
Hmm.
like that. And I got, so the Katies came and the Katies game, and so gang sludge nose, and that hench went what hopped it, donneth their doof to the Duros. And here in brackets, silence.
Silence. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I
That's
say, okay, I just need one more. I just need one more. Come on, Jim, help me out here. And so here we go, 274. So little ways down the road, longer chunk, but that's okay. And the pump and pipe pingers are ideally reconstituted. The potterum bowls are Peter packed up. All the presidents are determining as regards for the future the how-abouts of their past absences, which they might see on it hearing, could they want smell of tastes from touch, to what find values for the must overlistingness when X what is ungiven, as at where still hid. Plug. And the next paragraph begins, shut 'em up.
yeah. You
And
get the TV turning off with a blunk, right?
shut them up,
Yeah.
shut them up. Yeah, and
Oh,
and
that's
so I
great.
think, okay, well, there's my last intermission right there,
Wow.
And and I thought, and and so I think that's, I mean, these are kind of perfect. It's not symmetrical. It's like the first one is we got one at about 40 minutes in, another one about another 40, 45 minutes, and then this next one is probably about more like an hour and a half.
Hmm.
And then there's like another probably 90 minutes to go to finish up the chapter. But it's like, so those three spots, I'm going to do a 5 minute intermission for the first one, a 10 minute for the second one, and 15 minutes to let everybody, walk
Yeah.
around and stretch their legs before the home stretch.
So,
But
just the very endurance of the whole thing.
yeah,
Just it's I mean it's one thing to ask your audience to endure or to have the endurance. I don't want to say
yeah,
endure as in they're trying to put up with something, but more that just being able to listen, but being able to put all of that into your brain and then hold it
yeah.
for upwards of a year um, is quite astonishing. I mean, it is. Does this speak to your experience as a musician, like in terms of memorization? Has memorization always been something that you've been gifted with?
It's I've been interested in it. It's not that it comes natural to me. It's
Mm.
kind of the opposite. I mean, it's like a lot of work for me to to put something like this together. Like I look at my both my wife and my daughter can basically hear a song and sing back the lyrics like, just after having heard it once or something like that. And it's like that it's always been taken an effort for it, for me to learn something like that. Um, as far as this thing, you may be surprised to learn that I've never learned like a 5 hour text before, let alone performed a 5 hour text. So it's a question is, can I actually do this? Can I actually pull this off?
Yeah.
So part of the prep for this is, I figured out as I'm getting this ready that one thing I don't want to do is go out and just perform this whole thing for the first time in December. So
Mhm.
a couple weeks back, we invited some friends of mine from work to come over and hear me do about the first 20 pages right up to that. Uh, Actually, through the second intermission, through the silence. So it was about hour and a half worth of
Mm.
it, and that's partly just to give myself a deadline that I need to have this part down, to have that, in order to perform it for the invited guests.
I think that's the part that kind of fascinates me is so I used to play music,
Yeah.
and I also used to do drum corps and marching band and stuff like that. And in drum corps, at any given time, I had to know upwards up of an hour's worth of music between, warm-ups, chorales, marching pieces, and the 15-minute show itself.
Yeah.
And and the way that you described your approach to memorizing is just
Mhm.
like learning a really difficult lick on I played
Yeah.
euphonium and saxophone, note by note. I can do these two bars. And now let me add on another bar. Wait,
Yeah.
I messed up. Let me slow it back down. And I think that whenever anybody kind of approaches a task of memorization, especially one this large, what you just said about the idea of chunking things up and
Mhm.
allowing yourself to say, okay, let me go back and make sure I get this right at a different tempo that's not show tempo, right?
Yeah.
I think is critical. And one of the things that I'm interested in and hearing you say, because I'm kind of like your wife and your daughter, I can hear a song and I'd be like,
Yeah.
okay, cool, I know it. Um, is there anything from your musical training that you feel uh, uh, we know how it helps you? Is there anything from your musical training that like you wish you could apply or that like hold you back from memorizing this like
Well,
long
I
text or
apply. Oh, that's what I applied, and I think that the key thing here is, and it was like from that first experience with the Thunder word,
yeah.
is, oh, that's like music. It's not like reading. Um, and so the bigger take, and this is confirmed for me more and more as I go through that, and it's actually being confirmed by things that I found out that Joyce has said, is that I think this is more, it's more a piece of music than it is a book.
Right.
What
Mhm.
drives me to learn it and perform it is I'm imagining this world where Beethoven's string quartets are there, but it hasn't occurred to anybody to actually learn to play them. I
Mm.
mean, imagining a world where what people do with Beethoven's quartets is they try to read it, they try to hear it in their head. They sit down in groups, like a Finnegans Wake group, and okay, let's see if we can figure out what this would sound like. But nobody actually goes out and plays it. I mean, which is that would be, and that's like a horrible thing. I mean, to think of, people just sit around and look at Bach, Beethoven, Mozart operas, whatever, on their, just try and make sense out of it by digging into it on the page,
Mm.
but you don't hear it. You don't hear it.
Is
Uh,
in your process is how important is pitch in you memorizing? Like, do you approach the text more like jazz, where you're like, however it comes out this time is how it comes out, or do you try to standardize, like on this word, I'm going to say it like this in this
there's a
intonation?
lot of I mean, well, first of all, I mean, there are areas where Joyce is actually quoting specific tunes. I mean, I think this was back in chapter 6.
Hmm.
There were a couple of those things that there were very specific Irish songs that he was riffing on, and so when I figured that out, I went and I actually learned both of those songs. And of course, in chapter 2, there's the ballad where, I mean, that was one of the most delightful things
Mhm.
reading through Finnegans Wake the first time, that I get to the end and here's this thing that he's written it out.
Mhm.
He's written it out. And, and the challenge there with the Ballad of Percy Riley was that, I said, oh, that's cool that he's written this out. And then I would try to read it and I think, how does any of this fit with the tune he gave to
The
begin with?
scansion with the
How does
notes,
that
yeah.
work? Is he just messing with me? And so when I worked up chapter 2, I actually figured it out
Mhm.
that, but so like it's like the third verse is, so the first one works fine. Have you heard of one Humpty Dumpty? We fell with a roll and a rumble and curled up like Lord Oliver crumpled by the butt of the magazine wall, hump helmet and all. And then they get successively more
Yeah.
difficult
The
to
way the way the
my favorite one is well, Throbber's poor big cooking ape and see balls down in was capital, wicked wipe and fampany, Fingal Bacoscaro Desembarjars Boniface, Doxmin Gamelol Norvegicus, Marcarogus Red Gamelol Norvegicus Cod, the Norwegian Camelol Cod. He is bigod. Um, so it's you can make it work,
Mhm.
and I mean, it seems kind of clear like this where from Ross Polly. I mean, that this is like a big, flourish at the beginning, but then you say, oh, but you get back to here's where the tune fits. Um,
Yeah, and when we recorded Percy O'Reilly, we had my wife as a singer, and so she sang and
yeah,
arranged it and played, and that was the verse that she had the most fun with as well, and she treated it like recitative almost, where she really allowed herself just to play within that moment, and that's always
yeah,
the verse that I found most interesting to listen to is that it was the
it's
most
interesting.
fun
Yeah,
there. Yeah, it was beautiful.
yeah,
And Percy O'Reilly is the theme tune to our podcast. So it's but yeah, it's he gives you so much. He gives you so many of those little uh, uh, footholds that you can build
yeah.
a world within it.
I
I,
love
yeah. Sorry, go on, TJ.
I was gonna say I just love the sentiment of this book is more music than novel.
Mm.
It feels the longer we've sat with it and the more that we've encountered it and read through it, those times when we find the flow and the pocket of it of a section feels so satisfying.
Hmm.
And it now that you mention it, it's like I haven't felt that way since like sight reading a piece of music and being like, I know exactly what this is supposed to sound
Yeah.
like, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's fascinating because we have guests come on all the time who are reading, and generally they're not experts. So they come on nervous, and we always say, "Don't worry about the meaning. Just let
Yeah.
listen to it. Let the music of the words." And we all often use the phrase "music of the words" without even thinking about the meaning behind that. But we got the we always talk about the musicality of it. We said, just how does it make you feel? How does just allow it to flow over you? In the same way that if you were listening to a piece of music, no one gets to the end of a piece of music and says, "But I don't understand it, so I can't comment on it." But you go, "Okay, but how did it make you feel? Did
Yeah.
it make you feel happy or sad?" Or so we don't necessarily, or even song lyrics, you don't understand. We're only 4 days away, 4 days out from Kendrick Lamar performing at the Super Bowl, and the big result was people were like, "I don't understand what he's saying," and you go, "That's not the point. That is not the point. The point is how are you feeling? What is being set up here?" So yeah, that's a really fascinating.
Extraordinary performance.
Oh yeah, incredible.
Extraordinary performance. That was, and actually, I mean, when I think, I mean, the connection I have with that was the first international Joyce symposium I attended was in Antwerp in 2018, and one of the first papers that I heard read was this guy was talking about Kendrick Lamar and James Joyce,
Mm,
you know, side by side. Um, but that's exactly it. What I kind of loved about that halftime show was being kind of lost. I mean, not really having heard a little bit about the Kendricks and Drake's
hmm.
beef, and I listened to that to Not Like Us earlier, which is pretty hysterical.
Hmm.
Um, and but I didn't have a lot of context for it. It feels like
Yeah.
it's like, okay, this thing is on YouTube. I'm going to go back and
Yeah,
kind
and then all of the opinion pieces on it have been the skeleton key, where they've said this imagery, and then all the dancers arranged in a certain uh, uh, formation on the stage is spelling out words in Braille, and all these crazy crazy things, brilliant like Easter eggs. But exactly like the wake, where you go, I don't know what's going on. I can go and use Joseph Campbell to help me understand it, or I can just enjoy the music of it. Like that's
the
some really.
interesting thing about the wake, I mean, and this came up just now, is that in all of the chapters that I've done so far, I try to write, this is what's happening here. Always with the proviso that you're
Mhm,
not necessarily gonna follow this, but this is kind of where we are with it.
mhm.
Um, and the part two chapters, I mean, the chapters one, two, and three are so opaque.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean,
Mm.
so and it's like, and I've gone back to the Joyce Digital Archive of the Chicken Guy. There's actually my favorite
Mhm.
paraphrase of it that I find, and I go back to it, and then I try do my best to kind of try and track that and get my own foothold on what it is. But this chapter is it's like I made this specific point when I was talking to the guests. Okay, it's a bar, and in this section, this is kind of riffing on this story about the Norwegian captain and
Mhm.
the tailor is supposed to make a suit for him, and this weird kind of joke that doesn't really, it's not really that funny. It says, "Your suit doesn't fit." And it says, "Well, that's because nobody could make a suit for you that fits." So that's
Right.
supposed to be a hilarious joke. Which it's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. Um, but and but I made the specific point this time of saying, okay, I just told you about the Norwegian captain, and there are these three characters here that, hopefully you can kind of pick them out from the voices I'm using. But honestly,
Hmm.
it's like I do not recommend trying to track the story here at
Yeah.
all
That
because
whole, yeah.
it's given me this idea. I mean, I keep thinking, and the question is, what is Joyce trying to do with the wake anyway? Um, and the working theory that I have, for a long time, I've connected Finnegans Wake with Stephen Dedalus's. One of the big quotes that comes up from Ulysses a lot. It's in like the second chapter, second episode of Ulysses is history is a nightmare from which I am trying to awake.
Right.
Uh, and at a certain point, I going back and I'm saying that okay, there's history there, there's nightmare, which is a kind of a dream, and there's wake,
Mm,
and and so I kind of feel like Finnegan's Wake is related to that title, and
mm,
that maybe its aim is to awaken us. That this book is in some way supposed to awaken us from the nightmare of history. Um, and more recently, I thought, oh, and isn't it interesting that history in Spanish, I think in Italian too, history and story are the same word.
mm,
Um, and so the the kind of wild thought that here is someone who has devoted his life to making stories, um, coming to the conclusion that's what and is story a nightmare from which Joyce is trying to awaken us.
hmm.
And so with that, I've come to the thought that and this kind of lines up with the way the wake goes from the part one chapters, where certainly in the second and the fifth and the eighth chapters, I think especially, and Shem the Penman too, I think, um, that it's not that hard to find the narrative, to see the characters, to see what's being talked about.
Mm,
And then you get into part two, and there's a lot less to hang your hat on.
right.
So the thought that I've come to is with Finnegan's Wake, Joyce is weaning us from the need for story, the need for cause, effects, plot,
Right.
culmination, ending, uh, and and then the other thought, which kind of goes with that, is that what the story is for Joyce is it's like he pours story into this container with this other ingredients, and then there is like a lattice or something. I'm thinking of
Mm,
chemistry classes where you combine things and then you see these like things that emerge, and there's these things that emerge, and so what you have left is the story is what you started with, but these these patterns and motifs and themes are no longer telling that story. They're the result. I mean, that story was there as kind of the sourdough starter or the whole
hmm.
thing. The loaf
Yeah.
of bread is is something else again. It's not really a narrative. It's the main joy I get from Finnegan's Wake doesn't have anything to do with, you know, finding
Yeah.
out that
What's happening? Yeah.
the Norwegian captain came and he ordered a suit and he went away and he came back and he's mad that the suit doesn't fit and the tailor's mad that that you're impossible to fit and he goes off again and he comes back and then
Yeah.
and then there's a big wedding and a big thing, but that's not even as much as I know that I've gone back to that again and again, but that's not the experience that I have when I'm singing this,
Yeah.
I guess.
Agreed. I mean, and we have a tradition on the podcast where we will go through the Oxford World Classics summary of the chapter after we've read it. So we read and then we go through and say, this is what the academics say just happened. And nearly every time we read it, we get to the end and say, that was completely worthless. Because the idea of someone telling us this is the thing that happened, where a multitude of things are happening on multiple levels. So it's
Yeah.
not just one thing. And so trying to reduce it to that single story
Yeah. And
is,
I've done this, and I
yeah,
go back and I look at like the first draft version of Finnegans Wake, or I look at Campbell,
mhm,
and it's like, and I think that, I mean, I remember this early on, I'm going to Campbell and says, I'm going to find out what this thing is
right.
about. And then I read this, and it's like, okay, that doesn't make any more sense. That this paraphrase doesn't make any more sense
Hmm.
than what the original does. And the only difference is it's not as musical.
Right.
Uh,
And I think, yeah, and that musicality and meaning is something that's really fascinating me right now. The idea that if we treat it as music, so the idea of the multitude of layers of meaning
yeah,
that we get from reading, where you can see the
yeah,
misspelling of a word, and then that, and we can go down layer, 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 and each word, like when you go into Fleet, you can see a word has 15 different meanings. But
yeah.
if you're interpreting it, so how much time do you spend in interpreting the meaning of the phrases, or is it more interpreting it as a musical phrase?
I mean, I always lean toward the musical meaning. I
Mm,
mean, I think the strongest, the thing that does feel to me is pretty important is having, and the question that comes up, who is speaking here?
right.
Uh, and and so I find where what I do find that pops out of the wake is characters who really feel like they're real. I mean, and that I can speak them and bring them to
Hmm.
life a certain way. Uh, and whether it's the washerwomen in chapter 8, which was that was an absolutely delightful thing to
Right.
perform. And you have to, and unlike it's clearly a dialogue, and it's in a, and here this is something like the ballad that he gives you so many clues that yep, there are two people taught. It's going back and forth. That's all that's happening here. It's these two characters, but it's not clear. You don't see like mutt jute,
Right.
duck, tap, whatever here. You have to figure out, okay, this is where she stops, and this is
Yeah.
where she picks up, and this is where she and so there's work, but you can find it.
Yeah, we found that because we work on a cold read, we've found often that we right in the middle of a chapter, and then we go, oh, there are multiple voices here, but because we haven't
Yes.
rehearsed it, because we don't rehearse it, we think, oh, this would probably be a lot richer if we had anticipated this, and obviously we can't in the format that we're doing. We found that in the Senators 4 section in book 3, where there are multiple voices, and it's like ventriloquized all by
Right.
a single character, and we think, oh, this could be a really interesting
Yeah.
performance piece on its own if you knew the voices. But I mean, I was
Yeah.
saying to you before we started recording that our project of cold reading is almost the polar opposite to a prepared, memorized version that you're doing, because we're doing it completely on the fly, and you're doing it with this amazing amount of preparation. Um, but yeah, I mean, yeah,
Our cold reads often remind me of that first time I was in like an orchestra when playing through a piece and you hear those like those beautiful musical crashes where it's like everyone's
Mhm.
lost for a second and then they find it again. And I think the thing that I'm enjoying about that is that, during that time, especially the first time playing through a piece of music, they're like, we just gotta get to the end. I promise you, you'll be okay. Like,
Yeah.
and you'll be able to figure out what it is. You'll be able to decipher it. We just gotta get to the end. Um, and there's in the novel, the book, like you said, you turn to that first page, and it's like, oh, there's a lot of notes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then when you get used to like, I really just have to play it down, and then I'm gonna find something along the way. I think that's extremely fascinating, and I'm curious if, like a piece of music, what has been the strongest audience reaction that you've gotten? And if so, like what section do you think resonated the most so far that you've performed?
The one that I remember, the one that really surprised me was when I did part one, chapter six, which I was actually kind of terrified to take out in public. I knew it really well, but it felt to me like chapter six is largely dealing with the varieties of tedium,
Hmm.
of how many different ways a person can be like a complete bore.
And
Um,
this is the quiz section, right?
this is the quiz. This
Yeah.
is the quiz. Yeah, and it's like Joyce is always encyclopedic, and this is like an encyclopedia of the tedious, whether it's that pages and pages and pages and pages of attributes of HCE. That's the first question,
Right.
or the Izzy question, where it's like you're just listening to this teenage girl with her seemingly with her cat, just just going on and on and on and on
And you
about
forget
one.
they asked a question at
And,
all.
and then there is this hilariously full of himself professor. I mean, at the second to the last question, which also goes on and on and on and on and on. And the lovely thing about that question and answer is that's the mooks and the gripes are right in the middle of that.
Right.
And brief tangent, but very important here, is one of the things that I've come to love about Joyce is where he always takes his game to the next level on the last page of it. I mean, whatever he's writing, it's like he knows that I have to, boom, I have to bring this thing home. And he did it. It's spent his life doing that. I mean, that last page of The Dead, or
Hmm.
the end of Molly Bloom's soliloquy, but really the end of almost every chapter in every book he wrote. It's like there's magic that's happening.
Hmm.
Okay, so going back to the mooks and the gripes, um, coming to the end of that, he writes that as if this is the end of the chapter, as if this is. I'm gonna find it here because it's so beautiful. Um, and which also brings up, it says, no, I don't just have these things on a hard drive somewhere. It's like if I'm going to perform any of this stuff, I do have to refresh it. But so here's the end of that Mooks and the Gripes fable. Then Nuvoletta reflected for the last time in her little long life, and she made up all her myriads of drifting minds in one. She cancelled all her encausements. She climbed over the banisters. She gave a childy, cloudy cry, Nuve, Nuve. The light dress fluttered. She was gone, and into the river that had been a stream, for a thousand of tears had gone on her and come on her, and she was stout and struck on dancing, and her muddied name was Mrs. Liffey. There fell a tear, a single tear, the loveliest of all tears. I mean, for those Cry Love Fable fans who are keen on the pretty, pretty commonplace sort of thing, you meet my hope, Harrods. For it was a leap tear. But the river tripped on her by and by, lapping as though her heart was broke. Why, they, oh they, I so silly, I flown, but I know kind of. It's clearly the end of the chapter, right? That's
It's
clearly
beautiful. Yeah.
that's the end. That's the end. But then,
Nope.
no applause, please. Bust the ropes got rattleshaken, go around and circulate. And it's not only is it not the end, but there's like another half hour's worth of this chapter of just this professor just bloviating and going on and on. So coming back to what I was saying about the response to chapter 6, I was terrified going in there because it says, I've learned this whole thing, and the whole point is, isn't this boring? Isn't this, how long is this going to go on? Including making you think that the chapter is over. And then you've got another half hour that you got to contend with. And I'm thinking, I'm going to piss all these people off. That's all I'm going to do. I put all this work, and all this is going to do is irritate the hell out of everybody who comes to see it. And so I go in and say, okay, I'm doing it. And I got comment after comment about that this is the best one yet. It didn't feel like 2.5 hours, man. It just went by. It just,
Hmm.
so it was, and so it's one of the many moments that I've just thanked James Joyce for giving me something to make it clear he knew exactly what he was doing.
Right.
And also that no, he's not out to scandalize or bore or irritate people. I mean, this is music and theater and comedy of a very high order. And if you lean into it, that will communicate, and
Yeah, absolutely.
that was a wonderful feeling. And it just gave me so much confidence that, okay, I'm gonna keep doing this,
Mm.
no matter how outrageous, if he's doing this like exercise in tedium that chapter 6 is, or this monstrosity that I'm working on now,
Hmm.
or trying to figure out how to do the chapter with the marginal notes and footnotes like I
Right.
did last, that it's all work that is worth taking on, stick with it, and the payoff is going to be there. That's
Exactly. And we find that there are moments like that section you just read then, that transcended the cold read. Because when we read it, this is months ago, all three of us who were reading that day, all three of us noted that one paragraph went, oh, this is and we all came back to it and went, oh, let's read it again because this is beautiful. And even on a cold
and it's
read,
easy, and that one is easy to read.
it
I mean,
is.
there's nothing that's especially challenging about it, and this is why something like what you're doing is worth it,
Hmm.
because there are some of the
Hmm.
there's a lot of pages that are just like an nest of, how do I do this? Where am I supposed to breathe? I mean,
Yes.
that's the thing that comes for me, is like, this is going on and it's unpunctuated, and am I
Right.
seriously
You got different
supposed to,
things to consider. Yeah.
or anytime you run into one of the thunder words.
Yeah.
Um, but there's a lot like the Nuvoletta
Yes.
section in there that you just read it and it just, oh
Right. Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's one thing that I noticed a lot from your readings is, so when we first started off, we
yeah.
immediately said one thing we know we're not going to do is an accent because we were just like, I don't want to be offensive to an Irish person, but you have very this lovely Irish lilt that you go into, which obviously sort of really elevates the performance because obviously you've heard.
And to be clear, I mean, I remember hearing this at first,
Hmm.
and I have never been aware of doing an accent.
Right.
I mean, I'm not trying to do that. I mean,
No, no.
nearly all of when that comes up, it's phonetic. I mean,
Yes.
there's a lot of stuff where Joyce sounds it out, and there are places where he's not doing that, but there are so many cues about how this should sound, and a lot of it is the rhythm. And that's so it's mainly in hearing the music of it.
Absolutely.
And
And
when,
and you hear the
yeah,
chapter like when the recording of Joyce reading the Anna Livia
yeah,
chapter and you hear the melodious way that he's saying it, which is very similar to how you're saying it. And sometimes we
yeah,
find ourselves slipping into that kind of thing. We
yeah.
but yeah, it's sometimes the text just demands it.
I mean,
Yeah, we
and it's absolutely uncanny. I mean, I honestly have never, done any formal study of Irish dialect or anything like that. Um, but I remember the one that really hit me hard was when I performed final section of chapter one in Mexico City in 2019. Um, I'm blanking on his name, but he's a limericker. He's a scholar at the Dublin Joyce Center,
Hmm.
and brilliant man. I mean, and Terence, blanking on the name, and I don't have any way to look it up right now, but absolutely incredible person. And he said that my Irish accent in that last section was note perfect. This is an Irishman telling me that, and I'm honestly, only going with the page and trying to listen to what's this supposed to sound like.
Yeah,
Hmm.
that's the thing that we've pointed out
That's
a couple times where it's like the speaking of it forces the sound to be what and it actually is a feat because I feel like contemporary writers are so afraid to write in that specific of a voice because they don't want to alienate. But the thing that I've grown to love about this book is that it's not about alienation. It's about truth and authenticity in that way.
mm, I wanted to get back to the question about audience response, and there's one particular individual response to something I did that was also one of my favorite comments that I ever got. And this is from my friend Jessica Kernahan, who is from Ballymena near Belfast. And she works we both work at the Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle. And she's been in the States for a little while. But naturally, we early on started talking about Irish stuff. Um, and she came to this was and we met the year that I was working on part two, chapter one, which is the kids at play.
Hmm.
That's um, and she came and heard that, and what she told me is that hearing this was like it took her back. She says it sounded like my elementary school playground. That's what she said. I mean, that she said it was like, and almost like it was a magical time and space travel thing that I took her back to grade school and hearing all the kids and all the games and the rhymes and everything that
Right.
were going on. Um, you know, and that that's one of the every once in a while I get like a validation or confirmation on this thing, and that was and when Irish people in particular, connect with it, I mean, and really like what I'm doing with it, it means a whole lot.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that people who like Joyce really like Joyce. I think that there's not many people are halfway on him, and so when we first started this podcast, we were very concerned that there were going to be some kind of snobby academics out there who were going to have an issue with what we were doing, but we still haven't met any. Everyone is so kind and so open and so enthusiastic about working on this sort of stuff, and so I can only imagine that there'd be just admiration and positivity for this monumental project that you've got because no one's done anything like this. I mean, there's obviously readings out there. You can listen to the 30-hour audio book that, there are a bunch of those. But to memorize it and to perform it over these many years it's an incredible process. I mean, it's one thing that a question that I have is that how long do you retain this? Do you hang on to the past chapters? I mean, you're never
It's
going to get to a
it's
point.
there. I mean, originally, I mean, my intent with the project, and I was able to keep this up for a good long time,
Hmm.
is I would um, from 2014 up um, through 2021, I guess, I would reprise every chapter that I had learned before. So I would do. I mean, and that was including in COVID. That was when I started doing the Facebook
Right.
live performances, and that year I did. That was the year I did part one, chapter 7, and I did all 6 before. Um, and that year I could feel that I was starting to feel the strain. And then the next year, the year that I did chapter 8, I mean, the plan was to do all 8 chapters, but it was by the time I got to chapter 6 was pretty shaky.
Hmm.
And I was looking at the calendar and figuring out, okay, at this point, I'm either gonna I'm gonna have to either drop chapter 7 or I'm gonna have to cancel the new chapter. And I didn't
Right.
want to cancel the new chapter, so I ended up only doing those. So I feel like there was like a mental
Hmm.
physical limit that I reached that year. And what happened after that is the part 2 chapters are so intense. I mean,
Right.
they are so intricate and challenging. I mean, and that last one last year, I mean, it was like I was, just it was such a grind to get that to work. I mean, I finally performed it. I mean, I was having to perform that when I did it in Seattle, when I did it in Portland. Um, I was having to do it on book. I had to have the pages with me in a music stand. It was almost there, but it wasn't quite there, and it took forever to get it there. I finally performed it without, just completely from memory in Basel, Switzerland,
Mm.
and then the YouTube performance I did shortly after that was also off book, but it took a really long time to get that, uh, and also really delayed my getting started on the the third chapter, part 2, which is why, in large part why I wasn't able to do it
Right.
this past December.
And TJ and I are both theatre people, so we sort of go straight to the place of performance. Do you work with a director or a stage manager? In terms of staging it? From what I've seen some videos online of you performing, but there's certainly there's blocking that's built in there. Do you and
Well, what,
props
what
and
there
and
what there
things?
is I mean it's like it's tour de force. I mean it's like I'm doing this and setting this up. In Seattle I have a beautiful space to do this. This is the Chapel Performance Space, which is in the Good Shepherd Center in the north end of Seattle, which was formerly uh, uh, a home for wayward girls. So basically reform school for girls who went out and got pregnant. Um, and it was, interesting poetry was built in 1904 in Seattle. So it's this big Catholic heritage building, enormous building, and the theater, the chapel performance space was the actual chapel where the girls would go for mass, presumably. And it's this interesting. It has a strong liturgical vibe still. Very interesting acoustics. Kind of suggests a cathedral style reverberation, but it's just a hint of it. Um, and the staging of it, what I'm doing is the first chapter, kind of I moved in a circle around the stage itself, um, and the piano is on the stage. And going back to that performance I described in things, we mic the piano so that there are sections, thunder words or other
Hmm.
important sections, I'll declaim right into there and it resonates and reverberates. So after the first chapter, the second, third, and the fourth chapters were like the stage is 12 o'clock. Um, chapter 2 was 9 o'clock. Chapter 3 was 6 o'clock, and chapter 4 was 3 o'clock. And there would be progression. I mean, I divide each of the chapters up into 4 things. So there would be movement to 4 stations along the way. And so by the time I got to that 4th chapter, by the time I finished it, I was back up on the stage for the first time since chapter 1.
Hmm.
And then the chapters since then, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are all, constituted like a very slow movement from 9 o'clock to 6 o'clock. The part 2 chapters are making the same very slow progression from 6 to 3. And then the part 3 chapters will be, all bring me back to the stage. And then the final chapter will be all on the stage.
Fantastic.
So
That's
it's,
just, yeah.
there is stage direction, but it's very, very long term,
Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah. I just asked. We have a good friend, Richard Hart, who has his own performance project, and theirs is very much theatrically minded, and so it's just interesting to see the different perspectives. But we've taken up so much of your time, and so we'll let you go. But I want to make sure that if anyone's in the Seattle area, the plan is that the next chapter 2, 3, 4. Will be performed. So it's the second Saturday in December.
I think it's the second or third Saturday in December.
And so that's at the Good Shepherd Center in the Wallingford neighborhood in Seattle, which is on the other side of the country from us. So we'll have to just hear about it. But if we have any Wake fans in Vancouver or Seattle or Bellingham or anywhere like that, then yeah, it's just, it's incredible what you're doing. And so the idea of finishing in 17 years, the same amount of time that Joyce took to write it, is such an incredible achievement. And, we just, I can't quite get over that you're doing this way. And so hopefully we'll be able to.
I kind of look at what I'm doing sometimes. I think, whose idea was this?
It's incredible. Well, thank you, Neal. I mean, we're going to link to some articles that we have on your performances and your social media and things like that on our show notes, so that if anyone's interested in finding Neal or finding the performances, then that's all available in our show notes. But it's really quite incredible, and just the attention that you're putting on this text and discoveries that you're making really inspire us, because we thought that we were undertaking a monumental process.
Have you spoken with Gavin Kennedy? Is that name familiar at all?
No.
He's doing something that parallels what you're doing a little bit. He was he's goes around the world. He goes to Burning Man. He comes to the Joyce symposiums, and then just invites people to come read a page of the Wake.
Right.
And then he gives them and asks them, what do you want for a soundtrack? What music do you want behind you while you're doing this? And then films it. And he and I can't remember what he calls the project, but it's Gavin, Gavan, and Kennedy, just like Kennedy. I mean, you should.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know that TJ is going to be laughing at me right now, because every time we think we're nearly at the end of the podcast, I emailed him and say, I have one more bonus episode. I need to add one more thing, because we keep finding these fascinating people.
Yeah, I think Gavin is, it feels like it's very resonant with what you're doing.
Wonderful.
And I do need to check out your podcast.
Yes, please do. It's not nearly as polished as what you're doing, but maybe that's part of the point. Okay. Absolutely. Well, that is all the time we have this week for Wake. We'll return next week to continue with our reading as we continue pulling at the threads of this incredible text. I've been Toby Malone, joined as ever by TJ Young. Thank you, TJ, for being here.
Of course.
And it has been such a pleasure to have Neal Kosaly-Meyer here with us. I'll link to your various projects in our show notes. So thank you so much, Neal. We'll see you next week, rememberers. This has been Wake, a cold reading of James Joyce's Finnegans Wake, just to hear it out loud. If you've made it this far, thank you for your dedication. Join us next week for another segment of Finnegans Wake and a chat about what we've found. Wake is a Moon Street Media podcast, engineered by TJ Young and Toby Malone. Our theme song is The Ballad of Perso Riley, arranged and performed by Meg Logue after James Joyce. Wake is recorded in Canada, where Finnegans Wake is in the public domain. For community and bonus content, join us at our free Patreon at patreon.com/wakepod. If you have questions about Finnegans Wake, don't ask us. We're just as confused as you are. See you next week.